1 hour after a disabled woman was slapped in a small restaurant, a line of bikers walked in, then shocked everyone. The slap came first. Loud, sharp, unmistakable. It echoed through Harbor Dine, a cozy restaurant on River Street in Savannah, America, where the ceiling fans turned slowly, and the scent of fried shrimp hung thick in the air. It wasn't the kind of place where violence belonged. Families came for pie, couples came for peace, but that night peace broke with one cruel sound. Marilyn Greer, the woman who had been struck, was sitting in the far booth near the window. She was 47, thin, and carried a cane carved from oak. Her left leg trembled sometimes when she stood too long. The aftermath of a car accident years ago that had left her half paralyzed and fully tired of pity. Still, she came here every Thursday night, same booth. Same meal, chicken soup and a buttered roll. She liked routine. It made her feel invisible, and invisible was safe. But that evening, 4 people decided to notice her for all the wrong reasons. They were young mid-20s, maybe dressed too loudly for a place that sold comfort food. Trent Harlow led the group, all slick hair and restless energy. With him were Evan Pike, shorter but mean in the eyes, and 2 women, Sierra Vale and Jenna Crow, both dressed like the night owed them attention. They'd been drinking before they came in, no doubt about it, and now they wanted a show. At first, it was whispers. Then smirks. Trent pointed at Marilyn's shaking hand as she lifted her spoon. "You see that?" he said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "It's like she's stirring air." Laughter followed short, cruel bursts. Marilyn lowered her eyes, pretending the soup mattered more than people. Her chest felt tight. She told herself, don't look up, don't give them more. But the noise didn't stop. Evan leaned back, chair creaking, and called out, "Hey lady, you need a babysitter with that spoon?" Sierra giggled, tossing her hair. It was the kind of laughter that left bruises you couldn't see. The waiter, Daniel Ross, saw what was happening. He was a nervous young man, probably 22, wearing a uniform a size too big. He hesitated. The manager, Mrs. April Sutton, was busy at the register. The other diners glanced up, then down, deciding silence was easier than trouble. Marilyn's hand trembled harder. She wanted to leave, but pride kept her pinned to the seat. She had spent her life being told to endure. Endure doctors, pain, looks. Tonight was supposed to be quiet. Trent stood. "Let me help you with that," he sneered, striding toward her table. His steps were heavy, his grin already cruel. Marilyn looked up for the first time, blue eyes wide and frightened but firm. "Please," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Leave me alone." He leaned closer. "What did you say?" Her lips trembled. "I said, leave me." The slap cracked like thunder. Her cane clattered to the floor. Her soup spilled, staining her sweater gold. The restaurant went still. No one breathed. Marilyn's cheek burned red and raw. Trent smirked, proud of himself, as though he had just proved something. Behind him, his friends laughed again, but their laughter was thinner now, uncertain. Daniel Ross took a single step forward, voice shaking. "Sir, you can't do that. You need to leave." Trent turned, glaring. "Or what?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The room was full of eyes now watching, silent, angry, but scared. April Sutton finally shouted from the counter, "Get out!" "The police are coming." Her voice carried more fear than authority. The group of 4 hesitated only a second before walking out, still laughing, still pretending they weren't cowards. The bell above the door rang once and then fell silent. For a moment, Marilyn sat frozen. Then slowly she reached down for her cane. Daniel bent to help her, but she shook her head. Her hand was shaking so much she could barely grip the handle. The room smelled like soup and shame. No one knew what to say. A woman near the counter whispered, "Poor thing," but didn't get up. A man in a booth muttered something about kids these days. The silence afterward felt heavy, like guilt shared by everyone. Marilyn didn't cry. She dabbed her cheek with a napkin, breathing through the pain. "It's fine," she murmured, though nothing about it was. Daniel offered to call her a cab, but she refused. "I'll walk," she said softly. "It's not far," April wanted to insist, but Marilyn had already turned toward the door, cane clicking against the tile. When she stepped into the night air, Savannah felt colder than it had an hour before. She didn't notice the motorcycles at first. They were parked a few blocks away, black shapes under the streetlight, silent and waiting. The men leaning against them smoked without talking. One of them, an older man with gray in his beard, Graham Cole, flicked his cigarette into the gutter when he saw her limp past. His eyes narrowed. He'd already heard the story. Word traveled fast in Savannah's streets when someone crossed a line like that. Inside Harbordine, Daniel mopped the floor where the soup had spilled. April locked the doors early, muttering prayers. The other customers left quietly, their dinners unfinished. Outside, the engines rumbled to life. One by one, they rolled out from the curb, slow and steady, heading toward the restaurant. An hour after the slap, the night began to change. The restaurant didn't feel safe after Marilyn left. It felt emptied out, like the walls had taken a hit too. People spoke in low voices, the kind of whispers that carry guilt. Daniel Ross wiped at the spilled soup even though the stain had already sunk into the fabric seat. April Sutton stood by the register with her phone in her hand, ready to call the police again if she had to, her eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. Nobody finished dessert. Nobody asked for coffee. The slap had stolen everyone's appetite. Outside, Savannah kept moving like nothing had happened. The river kept rolling past the docks. Streetlights hummed over the sidewalks. But a different sound began to rise in the distance engines, one after another, not racing, not showing off, just coming closer with a steady purpose. It wasn't one bike. It wasn't two. There were many, the kind of sound that made people stop pretending. A man in the corner booth looked out the window first. His face drained of color. "Oh no," he breathed, and the words drifted through the quiet like smoke. Heads turned, forks paused in midair. Chairs creaked as people shifted, trying to see. The windows filled with shadows, tall shapes in heavy jackets, helmets tucked under arms. The bikes parked along the curb in a clean line, engines dying out one by one until the street went strangely calm. Then the bell above the door rang. A line of bikers stepped into Harbordine. Not running, not yelling, not pushing people aside. They walked in slow, calm steps like they were choosing to be careful. That calm didn't comfort anyone. Calm could be a warning too. The first man through the door was broad-shouldered, with gray threaded through his beard and hair. His name was Graham Cole, and he carried himself like someone who did not waste words. Beside him was a woman with sharp eyes and braided hair, Lydia Hart, who looked around the room like she was counting every heartbeat. Behind them came a man with tired eyes named Miles Dorsey, another with a strong jaw named Noah Klein, and a smaller woman with a thin laptop bag and quick hands, Tessa Rowe. They were followed by two more people who stayed near the door, Rhett Larkin, quiet and watchful, and Megan Voss, whose face stayed neutral but alert. Nobody cheered, nobody clapped. The fear in the room didn't care about manners. It only cared about risk. Graham lifted both hands, palms open, making sure everyone could see he wasn't holding anything. His voice was low, steady, and clear enough to reach every table. "We're here about Marilyn Greer." The name landed like a stone in water. Daniel swallowed hard. April's grip tightened on her phone. A couple near the window exchanged a look that said, "This is going to get worse." Even the cook leaned out from the kitchen door, eyes wide. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat seemed to fail him. She left," he managed. "She went home." Lydia's gaze didn't harden, but it sharpened. "How long ago?" "Less than an hour," Daniel said, and then added quickly, as if speed would protect him. "I'm sorry." "I offered to call her a cab." Graham nodded once, as if he expected that answer. "Then we came in time." April's voice trembled. "If you're here to make trouble." "We're not," Graham said. Not angry, not loud, just certain. He turned his head slightly toward Lydia, and she stepped forward, walking toward the booth Marilyn had used. The napkins were still on the table. A smear of soup remained on the seat. The sight of it made Lydia's mouth tighten. "You were hurt here," Lydia said to the room, as if Marilyn could still hear her. In front of people. "We heard about it." Someone near the back whispered, "Who are they?" And another person answered, "I don't know, but look at them." Graham looked toward Daniel again. "Tell me the names." Daniel hesitated, then spoke. Trent Harlow, Evan Pike, Sierra Vale, Jenna Crow. At those names, Miles Dorsey exhaled, slow and heavy. Noah Klein's eyes turned cold, not in a wild way, but in a disappointed way. Tessa Rowe opened her laptop bag without being asked, as she had already planned the next steps. Graham's jaw tightened. "Those four have ties to us," he said. "Not the kind we're proud of." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of strangers who still didn't trust him. "And what they did tonight shamed us." The word shamed surprised people. It sounded old, almost like something from another time when actions had weight beyond the moment. A man at the counter scoffed under his breath, but he didn't say anything louder. The room held its breath again. Graham reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. Everyone tensed, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a document, thick and clean, like it had been protected from dust. He walked to the booth and placed it on the table with care, as if he were setting down a fragile thing. "It's a deed," he said. "A house in Charleston, America, small yard, safe street. It belongs to Marilyn Greer now." April's mouth fell open. Daniel stared at the paper as it had turned into a live animal. That can't be real," Daniel said. Tessa Rose stepped closer and slid a second set of papers onto the table. "It's real," she said, her voice calm. "Recorded properly, signed properly. The transfer is clean." Lydia turned her face toward the room, like she wanted everyone to understand exactly what was happening. "There's also a gift," she said. $5 million. The restaurant made one single sound, an inhale so sharp it felt like the whole building drew air at once. A woman near the wall put her hand over her mouth. Someone else whispered, $5 million? Like saying it too loudly might break it. Graham didn't blink. That money was set aside for their future, for their comfort, for their plans. "It's gone now." Miles Dorsey spoke next, his voice rougher, like he'd been holding his words back. "They don't get to build a bright life on top of someone else's pain." Noah Klein leaned forward, resting his hands lightly on the edge of the booth. "They will be punished," he said. "Not with rumors, not with empty threats. With real loss. With consequences that last." April looked between them, still suspicious, still confused. "You can't just take someone's money," Tessa replied without attitude, as if she'd answered this question 100 times. "It wasn't theirs yet," she said. "It was money held aside, controlled by older hands. It can be redirected. Tonight it is being redirected." Daniel's eyes flicked to the soup stain again. His voice dropped. "But why do this?" Lydia's gaze softened, and that softness felt more powerful than shouting. "Because Marilyn Greer was treated like she didn't matter," she said. "And she does." Graham nodded toward the kitchen doorway. "Where's the manager's phone call? Did the police come?" April lifted her chin. "They're on the way. I called right after it happened." "Good," Graham said. "Let them come. We won't interfere with the law." Then his eyes moved to the booth again, and his voice shifted, turning quieter. "But the law won't heal her cheek. It won't fix her shoulder. It won't give her a safe place to live. We can do that." Lydia looked at Daniel. "Where's the best hospital nearby?" "Not the cheapest. The best." Daniel swallowed, surprised he was being asked, like his answer mattered. "In Jacksonville, America?" he said. "There's a medical center there. Good doctors, expensive." "Good," Graham replied, as if expensive was just another word for thorough. He turned slightly, and Rhett Larkin moved closer to the door, ready. Megan Voss glanced outside, checking the street like she was making sure the path was clear. "We're taking her tonight," Graham said. April blinked. "You can't just take her. We'll ask," Lydia said. "And if she says no, we'll still make sure the care is paid for. But she deserves to be offered help, not left alone with a bruise and a memory." The room stayed quiet, but the kind of quiet changed. It wasn't only fear now. It was confusion. And something else, hope maybe, or the shock of seeing power used in a way people didn't expect. Graham picked up the deed again and tucked it carefully into his jacket, like he didn't trust the world to keep it safe on a table. Then he looked at Daniel and April, one after the other, and his voice became firm enough to settle the air. "Our children made a mistake," he said. "They will pay for it. And Marilyn Greer will receive what was set aside for them." Then he turned toward the door, Lydia beside him, the others following in a calm line, and the bell rang again as they stepped back into the Savannah night, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the moment the engines went quiet and an apology walked in. The ride to Jacksonville, America, didn't feel real to Marilyn Greer. She sat in the back seat of a clean black car that smelled like leather and mint, her cane across her lap like a reminder that she still belonged to her own body. The streetlights slid past the window in long streaks. Every bump in the road pulled at her sore shoulder, and every time pain flashed through her, the slap came back to Trent Harlow's grin, the soup spilling, the heavy silence. Across from her, Lydia Hart watched quietly, not staring, not pitying, just making sure Marilyn didn't disappear into her own fear. In the front seat, Graham Cole said almost nothing, only giving directions when the driver asked, as if words were less important than getting her somewhere safe. When the hospital lights finally rose ahead, white and bright like a city inside a building, Marilyn felt her stomach twist. She had been in hospitals before, but never in one that looked like this. A 24-year-old woman who is paralyzed. The entrance was wide and clean, the glass doors sliding open without a squeak. Inside, the air was cold and fresh like it had been washed. The floors shone so much that the ceiling lights seemed to live under her feet. People in uniforms moved quickly, but no one bumped into anyone else. Everyone had a calm face, like panic wasn't allowed inside these walls. Marilyn kept waiting for the old sentence that always came sooner or later. Do you have insurance? She had learned how quickly kindness could fade once money entered the room. But before she could even reach into her purse, Lydia stepped forward, gave her name at the desk, and slid a card across the counter as easily as placing a napkin on a table. The receptionist didn't blink. She just nodded and said, "We'll take care of you, ma'am." And for a second, Marilyn wondered if the words were meant for her or for Lydia. Maybe both. A nurse guided Marilyn into a private room with a bed that looked too soft to be real. The blanket had weight in a good way, not heavy like worry, but heavy like comfort. Marilyn sat on the edge of the bed, stiff, unsure if she was allowed to touch anything. The nurse spoke gently, asked simple questions, and never once made Marilyn feel like she was a problem to solve. Lydia stood by the window, signing papers. Graham leaned against the wall, arms crossed, quiet like a guard. Marilyn hated how much she needed them there, but she hated even more how safe she felt because they were. The first doctor introduced herself as Dr. Hannah Pierce. She had kind eyes and steady hands. She examined Marilyn's cheek, then her shoulder, pressing carefully and asking questions that were patient instead of rushed. When Marilyn flinched, Dr. Pierce paused. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology felt strange because Marilyn wasn't used to doctors apologizing. Dr. Pierce checked the bruise on Marilyn's face like it mattered, like it wasn't just a small injury on a woman nobody had protected. "We'll document everything," she said. "Not to scare you. To protect you." Then a second doctor came in, Dr. Owen Marks, taller, with a calm voice and a notebook he actually used. He didn't only focus on the slap or the shoulder. He looked at Marilyn's leg and asked about her cane, her balance, and her falls. He asked how long she could stand before her muscles turned to fire. He asked what happened on her worst days. Marilyn answered out of habit, at first short, careful, like she didn't want to be dramatic. But the questions kept coming, and they weren't the usual lazy questions. These were the questions people ask when they plan to help. Slowly, Marilyn found herself telling the truth. "I fall more than I admit," she said, eyes lowered. "Sometimes I don't go out because I'm afraid I won't make it back." Dr. Marks nodded as if that fear made perfect sense. "We can work on that," he said. "It won't be magic. But it can be better." The tests began: X-rays, scans, careful checks that made Marilyn feel like she was being handled as something valuable, not something worn out. Between appointments, Lydia brought water, adjusted Marilyn's pillow, and listened without rushing when Marilyn tried to argue. Marilyn tried more than once. "I can't accept this," she whispered one night, voice small in the bright room. "I don't even know you." Lydia sat down beside her bed, steady and close without crowding her. "You don't owe us anything," Lydia said. "This is not a trade. This is us fixing what should never have happened." Marilyn stared at the white blanket and felt tears press behind her eyes. Not because of pain, not even because of relief. Because someone had finally said the words she never thought she'd hear. "You don't have to pay for kindness." Days passed. The red mark on Marilyn's cheek faded from angry pink to a soft yellow. Her shoulder still ached, but the pain had a name now, a plan now. Dr. Pierce explained everything in simple words. Dr. Marks showed Marilyn a path forward instead of a dead end. And then came physical therapy, introduced like it was normal, like she deserved strength. Her therapist was Camilla Grant, a woman with a warm smile and firm patience. Camilla didn't treat Marilyn like glass, but she didn't treat her like a burden either. She guided Marilyn through careful movements, teaching her how to stand in ways that didn't steal her breath. When Marilyn struggled, Camilla didn't say, "Try harder." She said, "We'll try together." Those 4 words felt like medicine too. With each session, Marilyn learned something new about her own body, what could be improved, what needed support, and what had been ignored for too long because the world is quick to accept suffering when it belongs to someone else. She began to notice her own strength again, small at first, like a light that had been dimmed but not fully put out. She began to sit up straighter. She began to speak louder. She began to believe she was allowed to take up space. One morning, while the sun cut through the blinds, A woman in a neat blazer stepped into the room. She introduced herself as Brielle Knox, from a law office in New York City, America. Brielle carried a folder that looked too important for Marilyn's bedside table. She spoke clearly, not fast, and explained paperwork that sounded like another language: ownership, protection, taxes, planning. She didn't talk down to Marilyn. She translated the world into something Marilyn could hold. "Your house in Charleston is legally yours," Brielle said, flipping to a page with a signature line. "And the $5 million gift is secure. We're also setting up a plan so you don't get overwhelmed by people who might come looking for you." Marilyn stared at the numbers until her eyes blurred. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Brielle waited without pushing. Lydia stood near the door, arms folded, watching Marilyn like she was guarding something delicate. Not the money, but Marilyn herself. Marilyn didn't cry because she suddenly felt rich. She cried because someone had built safety around her, like she was a person meant to last. She cried because, for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a dark hallway. It felt like a room with a door she could open. Outside that hospital, the bullies faced consequences that didn't come with cheers. There were no dramatic fights, no wild rumors that turned them into legends. There was only loss, real loss. The money they had expected for their future was gone, handed to the woman they had hurt. And that kind of punishment followed them quietly every time they tried to imagine a life built on comfort. For Marilyn, that mattered more than revenge. The world had finally agreed out loud that what happened in that Savannah restaurant was wrong. And in that agreement, in that strange mix of justice and mercy, Marilyn began to change, not into someone angry, but into someone unbreakable. The house in Charleston, America wasn't big, but the first time Marilyn Greer stood in front of it, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Quiet. Not the heavy quiet of people refusing to speak up, but the calm quiet of a place that expected nothing from her. The porch was small, with 2 steps that didn't wobble. The front door was painted a clean, soft color that looked new. A simple mailbox sat near the curb, empty except for sunlight. Marilyn held her cane tightly as she looked at the windows, half waiting for the moment to turn into a joke, like someone would step out and say it was all a mistake. But nobody did. Inside, the air smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The living room had plain walls and a floor that didn't creak in a scary way. The kitchen was bright, really bright, with a clean counter and a sink that shone like it wanted to be used. The best part was the yard. It wasn't wide, but it had a small tree near the fence, its leaves glossy and alive. A lemon tree. Marilyn stared at it as if it could speak. The tree looked like it had been waiting for hands that would water it and not forget it. That first afternoon, before Marilyn had even finished setting her purse down, there was a knock at the door. Her body tensed out of habit. She moved carefully, can tapping the floor, and opened it only halfway. A woman stood on the porch holding a foil pan covered in a towel. She had kind eyes and short gray hair, and she smiled as she meant it. "I'm Elaine Booker," the woman said. "I live 2 houses down. I brought you something to eat." Marilyn blinked. You didn't have to," Elaine shrugged, not making a big deal out of it. "People do, though. That's what neighbors are for." She handed Marilyn the warm pan. "It's chicken casserole. If you don't like it, pretend you do." That made Marilyn laugh, just a little, surprised by the sound of it. Elaine didn't ask about the money. She didn't ask about the bruises. She didn't ask why Marilyn had come here alone. She only nodded at the house behind Marilyn and said, "Welcome home," like home was something normal Marilyn deserved. After Elaine left, Marilyn carried the casserole into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and stood still for a long time. Her eyes traveled slowly across the room, taking in every small detail. The light switch worked. The faucet didn't drip. The door closed with a soft click instead of a hard slam. Marilyn ran her fingers along the wall as she walked down the hallway, touching the door frames like she was learning a new language. This place felt real, but her body still expected the world to take it away. The nights were the hardest at first. Quiet can be gentle, but it can also bring back memories you've kept busy all day to avoid. When Marilyn lay in her new bed, she sometimes saw the restaurant again, the booth, the soup, Trent Harlow leaning in too close. She heard the slap in her mind, sharp and cruel. She remembered the laughter afterward, and worse than that, she remembered the way the room went still, like fear had glued people to their seats. Some nights, she sat up, breathing hard, her cheek burning even though it was healed. But the memory didn't own her like it used to. That was new. She could feel the pain, but she could also feel the mattress under her, the solid wall beside her, the locked door down the hall. She would reach for her cane, then stop, then tell herself quietly, "I'm safe." And some nights, she believed it. Weeks passed. Marilyn made the house hers in small ways. She bought plain curtains and hung them herself, her hands shaking only a little. She put a rug near the couch so her feet wouldn't slip. She placed a chair on the porch and another one beside it, even though she didn't know who might ever sit there. She planted flowers along the fence because she wanted the yard to look alive, not just clean. She learned the sound of the neighborhood dogs barking far away, a car passing, children laughing in the distance. One morning, she set a small desk by the window. The desk wasn't fancy. It was a simple wood with one drawer. But to Marilyn, it felt like a beginning. She opened a notebook, picked up a pen, and started writing letters. Not angry letters. Not sad letters. Clear letters. She wrote to a community center in Cleveland, America, asking about safe rides for disabled people, rides that didn't cost too much, rides that showed up on time, rides that didn't treat people like trouble. She wrote to a support group in Boston, America, asking how she could sponsor therapy sessions for women who were scared to go out after being hurt. She sent money quietly and carefully, not with a big speech, not for attention, but because she remembered the feeling of sitting alone with pain while the world looked away. The money changed her life, but it didn't turn her into someone careless. Marilyn did not buy loud things. She didn't chase crowds. She bought safety. She paid for therapy. She paid for help around the house when her leg acted up. She gave herself time to heal without rushing back into fear. And she kept watering the lemon tree. Months later, on a cool evening when the sky looked soft, a plain envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address. No stamp that looked special. Marilyn stood in her kitchen holding it, heart beating too fast, the old fear trying to rise again. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line typed clean and simple. "They won't touch anyone like that again." No big speech. No threats. No details. Just that. Marilyn read it twice, then sat down at her table, letting the words settle. She didn't feel happy exactly. She felt something steadier. Like the world had finally admitted it had been wrong. Like her pain had been seen and answered, not ignored. That night she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, the air cool around her. The sky turned gold as the sun sank, and the neighborhood grew quiet in a peaceful way. She wasn't suddenly fearless. She wasn't suddenly perfect. But she was different in the way that mattered. She had proof that cruelty can cost something. She had proof that help can arrive even late, even unexpected. And she had a house where the doors locked, the lights worked, and the future didn't feel like a punishment. Back in Savannah, America, Harbor Dine kept serving soup and rolls, and lemon water. The booth stayed old. The lights stayed warm. People still came in with their small problems and hungry hearts. But the people who had been there that night remembered. They remembered the slap, the shame, the silence. And they remembered the hour later when engines went quiet outside, and an apology walked in wearing leather and real shame. Marilyn Greer, once treated like she was easy to break, became someone the world finally learned not to underestimate.